Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Duder. Welcome back to the Den. And today is a bit of an addendum to the previous video that I produced, the direwolf video. Colossal has released a brand new sort of response video to the very popular Hank Green and his whole response to this whole situation. And so I figured after watching that video and then after reading the peer review article, I would go over basically sort of what's going down and clear the waters a bit when it comes to what actually is happening with Colossal itself and the actual direwolves that they've produced. So the main question of the hour is, are these direwolves? And the answer is still no, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. So one of the cool things that Colossal really wanted to sort of break out is that these aren't direwolves, but they are exhibiting the same traits as direwolves, which I already touched upon in the last video. But essentially, it's 14 genes with 20 differences between each of the two species. When it comes to the confusion that's surrounding the whole why gray wolves, the sort of relation between these two species in general, that also can sort of be boiled down to the fact that the New Yorker broke the embargo that they had with Colossal itself, and that sort of muddied the waters quite a bit. Now, the actual peer review article is now available up on bioRxiv, and the overall data that has been produced in that is still up for peer review. And essentially, what this article sort of dictates is that what we inferred originally back in 2021 when the original paper was released is that these animals, these direwolves, are actually more closely related to gray wolves than they are to jackals now, or at least the sort of the level of relation between them and jackals and them and gray wolves is sort of equidistant now. At least that's what I understood from watching the video and reading the peer review article. Now, the other topic that I really wanted to cover in this is the fact that this sort of redefines a lot of different things. This really kind of puts into question as to what a species is, which already is very ethereal. It's not set in stone. If you ask certain people what their definition of it is, then you get different sort of muddied waters here, depending on if you ask an ecologist, a biologist, a geologist. You have all these different sorts of definitions that come up, and so there's a lot of new sorts of views that are being discovered or introduced when it comes to the actual science behind what's going on here. Another really cool thing is that it does redefine de-extinction as well, as now these animals who are running around, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, are exhibiting traits of animals that are no longer with us, but are still, in essence, dire wolves. At least the majority of their genome is. These animals are a whole new species, essentially. They're a engineered species that isn't 100% a dire wolf, isn't 100% a gray wolf. So the notion of calling them dire wolves still isn't entirely correct, so much as it's Colossal's dire wolves or neo dire wolves, something along those lines. Now, why were gray wolves specifically chosen as the surrogate as opposed to, say, something like jackals, or another option was red wolves that was brought up in the video? The reason being is that there's just so much data that surrounds gray wolves. Everything from their health, their behavior, their social hierarchy structure, with how they are in captivity, how they are in the wild. There's a ton of peer-reviewed and sourced data to go off. And this provides a great swath of information to then compare the overall health of these animals, of Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, to already existing knowledge of gray wolf anatomy, health, and overall bioactivity. This means that they can produce enough of a sort of comparative data spread to be able to dictate whether or not it's a viable option in order to use de-extinction, to use genotypic editing in order to better facilitate conservation efforts, which is what the main goal of Colossal and of this actual dire wolf project is in the end, is not actually just to bring back these animals from extinction, but to help conserve the existing animals that are at risk of becoming extinct. Now, apparently there's also been discovered some sort of gene flow between the two species that was not previously known. So that's another cool thing. Again, this is all up for peer review, so I don't know how true it is or how true it isn't. We'll have to wait and see about that. Regardless, outside of the actual genome and things like that, the overall animal welfare of these three animals was also called into question. That's the main priority of Colossal, apparently. That's what they have stated, is that they are looking to make sure that the welfare of these animals is first and foremost. That's why they use the surrogates of gray wolves, so that way they could better take care of these new edited animals. Now, will these edited animals be taken care of properly? Will these genes exhibit traits or produce needs that were not previously known? We have yet to see anything like that, but that's not necessarily evidence that there isn't going to be that risk later down the line as they reach maturity, as they reach adulthood. So we'll have to wait and see. But again, because there's such a swath of knowledge when it comes to gray wolves, it should be a lot more straightforward to address these sort of problems. Not necessarily easier, but more straightforward. Now, the main question is, why did all do this in the first place? And the answer is that by reintroducing genes, whether it be through extinct animals or endangered animals, like what they're doing with the red wolf coyote hybrids in areas where red wolves are threatened or extirpated, is to sort of promote more biodiversity and to help with conservation efforts. This sort of goes into this kind of idea of ecological Jenga blocks. So instead of having you replace the missing species within an ecosystem, say all of a sudden a keystone species in the Pacific Northwest has gone extinct in a certain area, but you have a similar species that exhibits similar traits, or a different species entirely, but it exhibits the same sorts of behaviors and overall benefits and the ecological services that the previous species did before it went extinct. If you reintroduce that species or introduce that new species into that environment before the ecosystem that surrounds it collapses, you could save that ecosystem. This is a very highly debated topic in the realm of environmental science and ecology, specifically in various fields of conservation. So it's still up for debate whether or not this is helpful in an environment. In my opinion, I believe that it is, though it's very nuanced. As then you get into the whole idea of invasive species, whether or not these animals will be here, what sort of things introducing a new species to an ecological environment where they would produce a similar result but would still be somewhat different from the original. That sort of ripple effect you need to take into account as well. And that's kind of why Colossal is doing this with their dire wolves. Now, to address another elephant in the room as to why do these dire wolves look like stereotypical Game of Thrones fantasy wolves? Well, that is another really cool aspect of this overall scientific breakthrough. That being that Colossal has made humongous strides when it comes to actual genome editing technology. they have not only found a new way of obtaining genotypic information from cells that previously would not have been viable options to do so, like red blood cells, as well as finding DNA and genotypic information in areas that were previously deemed too degraded to actually be able to produce viable data, as well as the really cool aspect of multiplex gene editing, which means that we can now edit the genome of a certain animal, of a certain organism, in multiple different areas. So that way, not only are we coding for, say, blue eyes in these gray wolves, but we also now can code for, a larger skull, white fur, that sort of thing, all in the same genome at the same time. This cuts down on time, obviously. It also sort of introduces a little bit of a pro and a con, that being that you introduce more variability, which could lead to larger problems, but also you introduce the idea that if these problems were to arise, you can now more readily see it because there is a larger sort of data pool to go off of when it comes to these genotypic expressions. In fact, that's why these gray wolves are white, because when comparing the genomes between gray wolves and Anicyandiris, the dire wolf, multiple different genes were being coded, so that way the gray wolves were mirroring those genes found in dire wolves. Now, one of those genes that was found in dire wolves that wasn't found in gray wolves would have coded and expressed phenotypically lighter fur coloring. Now, that was going to be the original gene that they went with, but that gene would have also led to risks such as albinism and hearing loss. So instead, they went for a gene that would have coded phenotypically for the same sort of result, but would have led to no sort of genetic, we'll say, dead weight on the genome itself. This concept is incredible, in my opinion, because now we can sort of introduce the idea of coding for different traits based on the actual genome of each organism, instead of based on the genome that we know a previous organism had for that trait. Essentially, what it means is we can produce traits that would mimic the same traits in other organisms, in certain organisms, without the edited organism exhibiting any sort of negative traits that would have come from introducing these sort of foreign concepts, we'll say, to that genome itself. This is a huge deal because it kind of unlocks basically any sort of real genetic editing. We can sort of begin to code for whatever we want now. Now, the science behind this is also kind of scary, because you get into the whole ethics and moral dilemma of, when do we start to play God? When do we start to really overstep our boundaries when it comes to editing certain things? And then it comes to the threat of what happens if someone gets their hands on this and tries to edit human DNA. So there is a lot of morally questionable stuff going on as well when it comes to the development of the science as is. But for right now, in terms of the positive aspect, this is humongous. It's amazing, and it's something that I really, really, really want to drive home. Is Colossal is doing incredible work, and it's something that I'm really excited to see develop in the future. I sort of fear that I may have come off as a bit too standoffish or Colossal hating in my previous video. That is not the case. I actually really, really love Colossal, and I think that I do believe, rather, that a lot of conservational efforts can be helped with the introduction of de-extincted species. So I was all for this. I was very excited. What I wasn't really happy about was the sort of zeitgeist and the misinformation that was surrounding it. But that doesn't seem to be Colossal's fault at all. That seems to be the New Yorker's fault for breaking their embargo when it comes to the actual information and the article that they were going to publish. Colossal has come out and stated that they wanted to publish the article along with the peer-reviewed, or the article up for peer review and the announcement of these animals at the same time, but they weren't able to do so, which is why everything is all muddied. Oh, another really cool thing that came out was the idea of cloning animals without surrogates in the future. Things like artificial wombs for placental mammals, that sort of idea is really, really cool, because then we can start to actually build genomes 100% from the ground up. Like, we're talking real sci-fi Doctor Wu Jurassic World stuff here. And that's incredible, because now we can sort of engineer animals to help fight against extinction and extirpation of certain different animals in different areas. We're talking about maybe even producing entire viable embryos and offspring that are 100% gray wolf DNA or 100% dire wolf genome DNA, using the existing DNA genomes of living relatives such as dire wolves, or gray wolves, coyotes, that sort of thing. And it's really, really cool. It's also kind of scary because, again, we're engineering whatever the hell we want. So it can sort of, you are looking at a very Jurassic World coded-esque issue here, or worse off, even sort of like some dystopian kind of human engineering thing. So there is a lot of nuance that's going into this that I am not really going to cover in this short little diatribe that I'm doing right now, but I would love to dive into that more so in the near future. So I expect a video on that at some point. So overall, in the end, to summarize, to put together everything, no, these aren't dire wolves. No, they're not great wolves. But at the same time, the science that surrounds these animals is immensely important for the future of conservation, of de-extinction, and of overall ecological and biological categorization. It turns out gray wolves and dire wolves may be more closely related than we thought. It turns out the idea of sort of defining what a species is may be way more loosey-goosey than we thought. And it turns out that a lot of the science that surrounds genetic engineering is progressing at a rate that could be seen as really positive or really negative, depending on your viewpoint. Personally, I view it as very positive, though I am fully aware of the negative aspects that surround it. But overall, the future of conservation, of biodiversity, and of the overall health of the planet seems to be bright. But we have to make sure that it's kept in check, lest we get another Ian Malcolm scenario on our hands. That's basically it for the overall update on dire wolves. If you guys enjoyed, me just sort of rambling, please let me know. If you have any opinions yourselves on the whole aspect, please let me know in the comments below. If you like the artwork that was going on in the background of this, let me know as well as that too. I have a bunch of other videos that are coming out soon, and I'm really excited for you guys to watch. If you have any suggestions for anything you'd like to see me cover or talk about, or even, just sort of draw, doodle, let me know in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Again, it really, really, really helps the algorithm, and it helps me out too, because I like making this stuff for you guys, and I really want to see what you guys are interested in to sort of gauge that. Follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, X, YouTube, obviously, here, DeviantArt. And I hope to see you all again next time. This has been Duder, and thanks for stopping by the den. Have a good one, guys.